The lobby of the Easton Grand Hotel felt like an oven. Temperatures had climbed past a record-breaking 105 degrees Celsius, and with the air conditioning dead, the marble floors radiated heat like hot coals. Guests in designer suits and silk saris wiped sweat from their brows in frantic circles, their voices rising in a multilingual roar of complaints. At the center of it all, the ornate fountain sputtered out a weak trickle of water before going silent. Then, with a sudden clank from the service corridor, Jack Harper appeared, wrench in one hand, toolbox slung over his shoulder, coveralls streaked with oil and grime. He glanced at the ductwork above and didn't hesitate. Climbing the ladder with practiced ease, Jack swung open the main intake panel. Sparks flew and a hiss of escaping steam mingled with the murmurs of astonished onlookers. He plunged his hands into the tangle of wires and levers, his face set in calm determination. Moments later, he flipped a switch and leaned back as a rush of cool air swept down washing relief over the stifled crowd. Did that give you chills? If you believe that heroes can emerge from the most unexpected places, drop a comment below and hit subscribe because this 12-part journey is just getting started and you won't want to miss a moment. Jack Harper climbed down from the ladder toolbox in hand and instinctively wiped his brow with the back of his glove. The swirl of cool air in the lobby felt almost surreal after the suffocating heat. Guests blinked in gratitude, some even applauding, though most simply fanned themselves in stunned relief. Jack offered a small nod and began securing the panel cover, all the while keeping an ear open for Mrs. Liu's soft Mandarin apology and Herr Wagner's halting English. "Thank you very much, sir." He had been on the night shift for nearly 3 years, quietly keeping the Easton Grand's bones in working order. Changing light bulbs, unclogging drains, tightening loose railings. But tonight's emergency had pushed him into the spotlight, and he noticed the way guests craned their necks, the way the fountain's few remaining onlookers whispered, "That's him, the maintenance guy." Jack tried not to smile. He wasn't here for the praise. He was here because a single job had to be done, and he was the one who could do it. He set his wrench inside his toolbox, then looked toward the front desk where a flustered young clerk was fielding more questions than her tablet could handle. Without a word, Jack walked over. He laid a comforting hand on the clerk's shoulder, offered a gentle smile, and pointed her toward a corner where 2 fans had inexplicably come to life once the thermostat kicked back on. She exhaled thanks, and Jack gave her a reassuring nod before turning to leave. But he didn't get far. From the edge of the lobby, a tall, composed woman in a sharply tailored suit watched him. Emma Sterling, CEO of the Easton Grand's parent company, had descended from her private balcony to witness the spectacle firsthand. She had never once stepped onto the floor during a maintenance crisis. Yet something about the man in grease-stained coveralls and his unfazed expertise drew her attention. Jack felt her gaze, but didn't look up. He retrieved a small rag from his back pocket and polished the edge of a service stairwell door. He hummed a soft tune under his breath, oblivious to the crowd's shifting mood. Moments earlier, he'd overheard a British guest say, "I thought this place never faltered." Now, with the temperature settling back into a reasonable range, that very guest was quietly receiving a fresh cup of iced tea from room service, tipped generously for Jack's efforts, though he'd never know. The sweltering evening had been building to a breaking point all day. By sunset, the lobby's soaring glass windows had captured every last ray of heat, trapping it inside like a greenhouse. Staff members had trudged through the corridors in dread, anticipating the inevitable system failure. Jack, meanwhile, had been in the bowels of the building, checking gauge readings and cleaning filters, routine work until the emergency alarm blared. He'd sprinted through back hallways, guided by the blinking red light on his handheld scanner. Less than 5 minutes later, he emerged into the open with the wrench and the resolve that turned a meltdown into a moment of quiet triumph. Now, as he hefted his toolbox and prepared to return to the underbelly of pipes and cables, the applause swelled one final time. Jack paused, looked up, and spotted Emma Sterling. She met his eyes, surprised to see him finally acknowledge her. He gave a small, respectful wave. She inclined her head in invitation in that silent gesture. Almost reluctant to leave his domain, Jack tucked his wrench into its slot, hoisted the box, and headed toward the desk where he'd been summoned. The lobby staff parted like the Red Sea, making way for him. He walked with that calm assurance of someone who fixes things, not just machinery, but moments. Emma followed at a discreet distance, her curiosity mounting. A dozen languages had spilled from his lips tonight, weaving through the lobby's tension, binding strangers in relief. It was an act of service so smooth and unassuming that no public relations team could have scripted it, yet here it was raw, real, transformative. Jack stopped at the front desk. Emma stepped forward. He didn't know her name, and she didn't yet know his, but in that instant, names felt secondary. It was about two people who understood that kindness and competence can be more powerful than any title. Emma cleared her throat. Jack looked up ready to reattach his name badge before disappearing back into the service corridors. But this time she spoke first. "I'm Emma Sterling," she said, her voice as cool and measured as the air he'd just restored. "Thank you, Jack Harper." He blinked, paused, then offered her a lopsided grin. "Just doing my job, ma'am." She smiled, a rare genuine curl at the corner of her mouth, and Jack realized his night shift might never be the same again. Jack wiped his hands on a rag and leaned into the scalding heat of the service corridor, steeling himself for the next burst of complaints that would surely ricochet off the marble pillars of the lobby. The main duct was now patched, the fans were spinning, and a rush of cold air draped the grand hall in a welcome coolness, but relief was still settling in. Behind him, the remains of the displaced steam hissed through the vents, a whisper of victory. He took a slow breath, then pushed through the swinging kitchen doors back into the lobby. The scene had shifted, no longer a chaotic melee, but a cluster of anxious travelers, their faces still flushed, their arms gesturing in rapid-fire pantomime. Jack recognized a frown in every language. A German grandmother in a floral dress wailed in fractured English about her missing reservation voucher. A Japanese businessman held up a smartphone, his katakana-laced English plea for directions meeting only blank stares from the flustered front desk staff. A Brazilian couple argued about extra room charges in Spanish, so thick it rolled like thunder. Jack set aside his toolbox and approached the German woman first. She was perched on the arm of a love seat, her hands fluttering like trapped butterflies. "I'm so sorry for the inconvenience," he said in perfect Hochdeutsch. Her eyes widened, jaw-dropping for a fleeting moment before relief washed in. "Es tut mir wirklich leid, gnädige Frau," he added, touching the edge of her scarf in a respectful bow. The word "scusi" might have worked, but his chosen tongue soothed her faster than any gesture. She exhaled, blinked back tears, and even managed a small, grateful nod before slipping her voucher from her purse to hand it over without ceremony. Next, a Japanese executive in a crisp navy suit was pressing his forehead against the concierge desk, crumpling a stack of foreign currency. Jack crouched to his level, slipping effortlessly into Japanese "Dabien shiri itashima." "Shita suguni, kaijetsu shimasu." The businessman's expression went from simmering annoyance to cautious curiosity. "Thank you," he murmured, and leaned back as if the simple sound of his own language had anchored him. Words spread like wildfire. Jack had become less of a faceless technician and more of a traveling linguist, his gravelly voice shifting accents with the ease of flipping a switch. An elegant woman in an ivory sari relaxed her posture when he greeted her in Hindi. "Mujhe khed hai, main aapki madad karta hu." A frazzled father from Turkey coaxed his wailing toddler into a quiet giggle with a playful "Annem de geldi yakında, tamam mı?" A Spanish tourist found himself nodding along as Jack explained in Castilian that backup generators were en route and that cold towels would soon be distributed. Between translations, Jack returned briefly to his toolbox to tighten a loose panel, but he never lost sight of the guests. Each time he unscrewed a bolt, he offered a soft apology in Portuguese, Chinese, Arabic. His coveralls smeared with grease became secondary to the warmth in his eyes, the steady cadence of reassurance pouring from his lips. No official interpreter could have matched his blend of technical confidence and genuine empathy. It was a kind of mercy most people expected only from frontline managers armed with policy manuals and complaint forms. Yet Jack dispensed it in wrenches and words. He was the eye of the storm, anchoring a crowd that had felt helpless, melting their anger with a dose of human kindness. And he did it without a flicker of ego. At one point, the Brazilian couple approached their tempers, tamed enough to clutch each other's hands. The wife summoned enough English to ask about a room upgrade, but Jack's Portuguese reply shifted the conversation instantly. He leaned in, dropped his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "No cost. My treat." Their laughter was soft relieved, and he disappeared back into the corridor before anyone could applaud. Up above, on the mezzanine behind tinted glass, Emma Sterling watched him. She'd meant to review sales projections tonight, but had found herself drawn to the lobby by the spike in guest feedback alerts on her tablet. Row after row of well-handled impressive. "Thank you, maintenance guy." She scrolled through the languages he'd used: English, German, Japanese, Hindi, Portuguese, Arabic, Spanish, and realized that tonight he had done more for her brand than any marketing campaign could. Down in the center of it all, Jack finally sheathed his wrench. He straightened, flexing his tired shoulders, and took in the transformed Tableau staff passing out cold water with newfound composure. Guests chatting in small groups about the hero of the lobby, the fountain glistening once more as attendants refilled its basin. The emergency had been neutralized, but more importantly, a sense of community had emerged from the chaos. Jack met the eyes of the young receptionist who'd nearly broken under pressure earlier. He offered her a gentle smile and a nod of encouragement. She returned it more confident now, ready to face any linguistic or administrative hurdle with renewed bravery. A few feet away, a portly British gentleman approached. Handshake extended. "I don't know your name," he said, "but I know who you are." "Thank you, mate." Jack tipped his head in acknowledgement, murmured glad to help, and bolted, already heading back toward the service elevator where his toolbox waited. Moments later, he stepped aside to let a cart full of ice packs and bottled water pass through, riding on the same wave of calm order he'd created. The lobby had regained its usual hush, the previous storm reduced to a distant echo. Emma descended from her perch on the mezzanine. By the time she reached the main desk, Jack had vanished. She found a folded paper bicycle, one of the hotel's origami favors, tucked into the wrench holster on his toolbox. On its triangular wings in neat block letters, someone had written, "Language opens doors. Kindness keeps them open." She folded the note and slipped it into her pocket, understanding for the first time that running a luxury hotel wasn't just about opulent fixtures or flawless service charts. It was about the people who moved through those spaces, and the ones who saw them not as reservations or revenue sources, but as human beings in need of relief, respect, and recognition. As Emma returned to her office to craft a memo that would ripple through every department announcing a new guest empathy initiative, she carried Jack's example with her. It was a reminder that sometimes the smallest act of multilingual mercy carries the greatest weight. And though she didn't yet know where to find him, she would. Because the man who spoke 7 languages and spoke to the heart in everyone was exactly the kind of person she wanted on her team and perhaps in her life. Emma Sterling pressed her palm against the cool glass of the third-floor mezzanine balcony and watched the scene below unfold like an unexpected performance. The marble lobby of the Easton Grand, usually an exercise in silent precision, had erupted into a human kaleidoscope of relief, gratitude, and quiet pride. Emma had seen the after-action reports, the flood of guest commendations, the spike in positive feedback, the murmurs that Jack Harper, the night shift maintenance technician, was nothing short of miraculous. But numbers and emails didn't capture the full measure of what Emma was witnessing now. Below her, Jack was folding his grease-stained coveralls back into his toolbox, a simple motion, but one that felt ritualistic, as if he were sealing away more than just his tools. He straightened, brushed a lock of dark hair from his forehead, and gave a gentle nod to the front desk clerk, an unspoken acknowledgement that the crisis was over and their world could spin normally again. Despite the late hour and the chaos he'd just tamed, there was no fatigue on his face, only a humble calm that radiated confidence. Emma's hand curled into a fist knuckles, whitening against the glass. She'd spent her career running one crisis after another: hostile takeovers, regulatory crackdowns, botched product launches. Every corporate emergency followed a playbook, scripts to memorize, drills to practice, executives to nominate as scapegoats or saviors. But this wasn't any scenario she'd ever trained for. There was no manual for extinguishing anger in 7 languages without breaking a sweat. No PowerPoint deck that demonstrated how a single quiet act of empathy could dissolve the tension of 100 demanding voices. Her earpiece buzzed insistently, a reminder of the video conference she was due to chair in 2 minutes, and all hands on the supply chain disruption that threatened to delay the hotel's summer expansion. She tapped her temple panel and sent a quick text. Reschedule. Priorities have changed. It was uncharacteristic, even reckless, but something about Jack's effortless leadership had compelled her to pause everything else. Emma took a step back and leaned into her swivel chair. The balcony doors closed softly, cocooning her in the muted hum of the executive suite. She watched Jack from this vantage point as if she could distill his essence through observation alone. The way he interacted with the guests, hands never raised in frustration, voice never edged with apology or defensiveness, but always steady, unabashedly human, felt like a masterclass in emotional intelligence. She remembered the early days of her own career fresh out of Harvard, brimming with ambition. She'd clung to every leadership seminar, devoured every self-help bestseller, pored over case studies from every industry titan. Yet, despite her training, she'd learned the hard way that heart-fueled connection couldn't be engineered in a conference room or simulated in role-play exercises. You could teach managers how to deliver tough feedback, how to navigate office politics, even how to execute a flawless elevator pitch, but you couldn't teach them to see people, to truly meet them where they were. Emma's gaze shifted to the clients clustered near the fountain, now smiling, chatting in small clumps as newly minted acquaintances. The heatwave crisis that had threatened reputations and racked up negative press had become a story of solidarity. A testament to our people, the upcoming marketing campaign would say. But beneath that tagline lived Jack's quiet courage, and Emma felt a swell of gratitude she rarely allowed herself to feel. She swiveled her chair and stared at the wall-mounted screen that usually streamed financial dashboards. Tonight it showed a muted graph of guest satisfaction scores climbing in real time. Each green bar was a data point in the narrative Jack had authored with wrenches and words. Emma tapped her lip thoughtfully. She needed to know more about him, what drove him, how he'd learned to speak German, Japanese, Arabic, Portuguese. What life stories lay beneath the coveralls? Her assistant's voice crackled through the earpiece. "Emma, the conference room is ready whenever you are." "Not today," Emma replied, rubbing her temple. "Cancel the supply chain call. I want a full profile on Jack Harper, background check, credentials, performance reviews. Everything." There was a brief pause. On it. She closed her eyes and exhaled. It was rare for her to drop everything in the name of curiosity, but she sensed this wasn't mere fascination, it was necessity. A leader's job wasn't just to command resources or ensure profitability. It was to recognize the unexpected solutions that emerged from the margins. And Jack Harper was exactly that, a solution in human form. Emma rose from her chair and walked the length of her office toward the service elevator control panel hidden behind a shelf of strategic reports. A quick press of the button called the elevator, its soft ding a contrast to the thunder of chaos below. When the doors slid open, Emma stepped inside the glass doors, closing with a faint whoosh that sounded a lot like promise. The elevator descended 3 stories to the staff corridor, its stainless steel walls reflecting her composed expression. Past the branded carpeting and plush furniture of the lobby, she passed rows of sidelined door frames and housekeeping carts, the heart of the building often overlooked by guests and executives alike. She felt a pulse of anticipation as she neared the maintenance bay, an unlit hallway that smelled faintly of motor oil and metal polish. She halted just outside the bay doors, peeking through the small window. Jack was packing his toolbox, wrenches, screwdrivers, voltage tester, his night meter that glowed in the dim overhead light. He'd cleaned up the last of the dust from the repair, his coveralls now bearing the faintest sheen of sweat. A woman from housekeeping offered him a bottle of water. He shook his head with a grateful smile and waved her off. Emma stepped through the double doors, her presence startling him just enough that he looked up, wrench still in hand. He set it down and offered her a nod of respect, a subtle reflex from years of courteous labor. "Mrs. Sterling," Jack said, voice steady but tinged with curiosity. "Can I help you?" Emma took in his posture, relaxed shoulders, steady gaze, that unmistakable air of confidence that came from having earned respect rather than demanded it. She cleared her throat, realizing she had never formally introduced herself. "Jack," she began, voice warm but authoritative. "I wanted to thank you personally for what you did tonight downstairs. What you leveled wasn't just a broken HVAC system. You leveled frustration, confusion, even fear. You didn't just fix machines, you fixed people." Jack's expression softened with a hint of disbelief. "It was part of my job, ma'am," he said, returning to his toolbox as if the moment weren't particularly special. It's more than that, Emma insisted, stepping closer. Boardroom training can teach crisis protocols. It can teach you how to cut costs or redirect resources. She gestured at the corridor around them. But it can't teach you the courage to kneel beside a scared child in their own language. It can't teach you empathy in 7 dialects. That comes from who you are. Jack looked up, emotion flickering in his tired blue eyes. I do what I can, he said quietly. Emma nodded, but in her mind she was already rewriting strategy plans. There would be training programs and leadership accelerators, but first she needed to create space for Jack's example to ripple outward. She thought of the thousands of employees who moved through these halls every day, each capable of something extraordinary if they had the right example. I'd like to learn more about you, she said, surprising herself with how sincere the words sounded. Not just your maintenance record, your story, where you learned those languages, what brings you here. Jack's hand froze mid-reach for a wrench. The maintenance technician and the academic linguist seemed to share a fleeting moment of recognition in his eyes. He nodded slowly. I'd be happy to share, ma'am, he said. Emma extended her hand in offer of partnership rather than hierarchy. Emma Sterling, she said, letting her guard down in a way she rarely did. Jack shook her hand firmly. Jack Harper. He replied, the grease from his palm leaving a faint mark on her sleeve, an indelible reminder that real leadership often bore the imprint of human effort. They stood in the softly lit maintenance bay. The rest of the world paused just beyond the corridor's edge. Emma felt the familiar buzz of her phone in her pocket, an unending stream of memos and demands. She left it silent. Tonight she had discovered something far more valuable than any supply chain update or financial forecast. She had discovered a person whose presence could reshape her company's soul, and that was a discovery worth every second it had taken to find him. Emma Sterling sat at her mahogany desk long after dusk had settled over the city, the only illumination the soft glow of her laptop screen. Across the floor-to-ceiling windows behind her, the urban skyline twinkled like distant constellations. But Emma's focus was entirely inward into the bureaucratic corridors of her own company's human resources database. She had summoned Jack Harper's full file after their unexpected hallway conversation, determined to understand the man who had, in one evening, upended her very conception of leadership. With a measured click, she opened the digital folder labeled Harper Jack, Personal File, and scanned through the basic details: date of hire, position code, shift assignment. Everything looked ordinary at first glance until she discovered a link to a scanned resume in the attachments. She opened it. Staring back at her were credentials that didn't belong to a mere night shift technician. At the top in bold letters, Jack A. Harper, Ph.D., Applied Linguistics, Columbia University. Below that, a line listing roles as an adjunct professor at NYU's Linguistics Department, with course titles like Advanced Phonetic Structures and Pragmatic Communication. There were glowing recommendations from department chairs and scholarly publications on language acquisition and cross-cultural communication. Emma's brow furrowed as she scrolled. This was not someone scraping by, but an academic at the top of his field. Her heart ticked faster. How had she never known she had interviewed Jack herself during orientation for new hires? She'd met him only briefly in a corridor press of people and never gleaned an inkling of his background. She'd always assumed he'd been the archetypal maintenance man drawn by stability rather than intellectual challenge. Yet here he was, a scholar who had consciously relegated his talents to the shadows. On impulse, she clicked open the next document, a note from HR that explained the unusual hiring decision. Candidate Harper appears massively overqualified, it read. Nevertheless, he insisted night shift availability and benefits eligibility were top priorities due to personal obligations. Candidate demonstrates exceptional technical skills and exemplary conduct during interview. That last phrase was an understatement. Jack's calm empathy had clearly impressed the interview panel, and now Emma knew why. Images flashed in her mind. Jack crouched beside a hysterical Japanese guest that sweltering night, murmuring reassurances in fluent Japanese. The German couple whose glances of irritation turned to respect as he explained the repair timeline in their mother tongue. The small Korean child he soothed with a playful pun in Korean. Each vignette had carried a common thread of patience, problem-solving, and an ease with language that Emma now realized had been forged not on the shop floor but in lecture halls and research labs. She opened a spreadsheet of Jack's benefits enrollment, then paused at the line marked Dependent, Henry A. Harper, DOB 0812, 2010. Adjacent, a note simply stated, Primary immunodeficiency. Chronic condition requiring ongoing treatment. Emma sat back in her chair, stomach tightening. Her own years of climbing corporate ladders had never been tempered by the need to provide round-the-clock care for a child's health. She'd once thought the biggest tests of resilience were hostile shareholders and merciless quarterly numbers. But Jack's priorities, family, first stability over prestige, revealed a resilience she had never fully grasped. The next file she opened was less clinical. A personal statement Jack had submitted to HR during hiring, a brief essay on why he'd chosen this role. The typed words glowed on her screen. I have a son, Henry, whose condition means my schedule must always be predictable. Academia demands time I cannot give, and while I love teaching and research, my son's health takes precedence. A night shift position with full benefits allows me to be at home during his waking hours and present for his doctor's appointments. I do this work with pride and humility, knowing that reliability and responsibility serve my family better than fame. Emma exhaled, her chest heavy with admiration. Here was a man who had deliberately chosen a humble title in service of a higher calling, love. The contrast was staggering. She herself had sacrificed personal relationships for ambition more than once, and yet here Jack had sacrificed prestige for the sake of his child's well-being, and never once had she heard him complain. She minimized the resume and essay windows and opened Jack's performance reviews. Month after month, they praised his technical competence, attention to detail, and willingness to take on extra tasks. Comments noted how he had helped mentor new hires and how colleagues sought him out for assistance with language barriers when international guests arrived. Through every review, there was a recurring theme: unassuming mastery. Jack didn't just fix broken things, he elevated the human experience of every person around him. Emma felt a swell of guilt. In all her years as CEO, how many times had she ignored the people in the quiet corners of her enterprise? How many managers had she promoted without ever knowing the stories behind the men and women who toiled behind the scenes? Jack's file convicted her of a blindness she had cultivated in pursuit of metrics and milestones. She leaned forward and tapped a key to dispatch an internal message to begin drafting a new role: Director of Guest Empathy and Cultural Engagement, draft job description. A small smile tugged at her lips. If she could build a position around Jack's unique talents, the hotel might not only respond to emergencies, but proactively create a culture of genuine hospitality. Her thoughts drifted to Jack's modest demeanor when she'd first introduced herself in the maintenance bay. He had set down his wrench, nodded respectfully, and treated her as an equal rather than a superior. For a woman used to deference and carefully choreographed courtesy, his unvarnished kindness had been a revelation. Emma stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling mirror that dominated one wall of her office. She studied her own reflection, the tailored suit, the composed expression, the faint worry lines at the corners of her eyes. What she saw now was a leader at a crossroads. She could revert to the old playbook: delegate, automate, optimize, or she could embrace a new paradigm: people first. And not just any people, but the ones who'd quietly chosen her company, not as a stepping stone, but as a place where their true talents, practical and poetic, could flourish. Her phone buzzed on silent, a reminder of the video conference she'd postponed. She silenced it permanently. Later, she would need to explain her absence to the board, but that could wait. Tonight, she had discovered the invaluable lesson that sometimes the most essential truths hidden within an organization were tucked away in the private pages of a night shift technician's file. Emma tapped open her calendar and created a meeting for tomorrow at 9. In the subject line, she typed, Jack Harper, New Strategy Discussion. She paused, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Then she added a second line, Subject, my highest priority. With that, she shut her laptop and stood the evening's revelation still humming in her mind. As she reached for her coat on the back of her chair, Emma felt a quiet resolve take root. She would honor Jack's sacrifice by ensuring his story, and those like it, became the guiding star of the Easton Grand. It was time to rewrite the narrative of leadership, starting with a man whose hidden credentials spoke volumes about what it meant to be truly qualified. And so with the city's lights shimmering like a promise beyond her window, Emma Sterling, CEO, strategist, guardian of her guests, prepared to step into a new era, led not by charts or rankings, but by the humble, heroic heart of Jack Harper. Jack Harper's evening had already stretched into the quiet hours when the service call came through. He was halfway through tightening a loose grill in the kitchen corridor when the pager on his belt buzzed insistently. Office thermostat, glitch corner office. He consulted his watch, 7:45 p.m. The lobby had emptied, dinner service was winding down, and most of the staff were on their way home. A solitary thermostat hiccup sounded hardly urgent, but Jack knew better than to judge by the call code alone. He set aside his toolbox and walked the hushed halls to the elevator, each step echoing against glossy tile. The golden light of the mezzanine lounge spilled through the paneled glass walls, and beyond the city's neon pulse throbbed against the night sky. In his mind, he flicked through the maintenance logs. Sometimes a low-temperature alert concealed a minor sensor misalignment. Sometimes it exposed a deeper wiring issue in the climate control network. Either way, Jack prepared himself for whatever lay behind that office door. The elevator doors slid open on the 32nd floor, and Jack stepped into the hushed corridor. Plush carpeting muffled his footsteps as he approached the glass-walled corner office he'd often glimpsed from below the sanctum of Emma Sterling, the Easton Grand's formidable CEO. He paused before knocking softly. The door swung open before he could rap. "Mr. Harper, sir." Emma's voice was calm, almost gentle, a tone he'd only heard once before back when she'd called him in to confirm the rooftop cooling system was fully operational. She stood by the sleek wall panel, arms crossed over her tailored blazer shoulders, relaxed in a way that belied her reputation for rigid precision. "Thank you for coming." He nodded respectfully and stepped inside, offering a quick glance around. The office was spacious yet minimal, dominated by a wide desk of dark mahogany, a wall of awards and framed architectural sketches of the hotel's expansion, and a single ergonomic chair pulled away as if in readiness for his arrival. Jack set his toolbox on the floor, pop-opened it, and retrieved his infrared thermometer and calibration screwdriver. "The sensor here," Emma said, indicating the small panel on the wall beside her window. "It's reporting temperatures 10 degrees below the rest of the suite." She didn't ask how to fix it. She knew he would sort it, but her curiosity was evident in the slight tilt of her head. Jack stepped forward and placed the thermometer probe against the panel. The device beeped low and steady. He frowned. "This sensor's reading cold air returning from the ducts, but the intake seems fine. I'll check the airflow channel next." He laid a hand on the panel's edge, turned a hidden latch, and eased it open. A soft hiss of cooler air greeted him, followed by a gentle whir from the miniature fan. Emma watched as he knelt, careful not to scuff the pristine carpeting with his grease-stained coveralls. He peered inside, repositioned a tiny damper, and gently rotated a dial until the airflow pattern aligned with factory specs. Then he closed the panel, wiped his hands on a cloth, and stepped back. She waited until he straightened. The room maintained a steady warmth now, the slight chill receding like an apologetic whisper. "Done?" she asked. Jack clicked the thermometer again, then verified the display. "All set. Should stabilize within minutes." Emma nodded and gestured to the chair. "I appreciate you coming up here. I know it's late." He pointed to his belt. "That's why I'm here, ma'am. Night shift's my normal schedule." She offered a half smile. "Right. Of course." He brushed a stray lock of hair from his forehead. For a moment, the only sounds were the soft hum of the HVAC and the distant murmur of late-night staff below. Emma cleared her throat. "Jack, if you don't mind me saying, last week when the lobby AC failed, I watched from the balcony." She paused, then met his eyes directly. "You did more than fix the machine. You calmed guests from 7 different countries, each with their own frustration. You spoke to them in their native languages. I've lived in boardrooms where I've asked for calm and gotten spreadsheets instead." Jack settled onto a nearby stool, turning to face her fully. "Thank you," he said, voice low. "I just wanted to help." "No," Emma corrected softly. "Thank you." She stood closer, closing the distance between CEO and technician until the faint scent of her signature perfume mingled with the clean tang of metal he carried on his hands. You reminded me what real service looks like, not the polished gestures for a camera, but the unseen work that shapes an experience. You reminded me why we started this business in the first place. Jack blinked. He rarely heard such sentiments from senior management. My son, he began, then paused. Henry's the reason I do this job. He needs me at night as much as I need a steady income and benefits. I may have a PhD in linguistics tucked away somewhere, but this? He gestured at the thermostat at the quiet comforts of Emma's office. This keeps me where I need to be. Emma sank into the guest chair, leaning forward. I dug into your file after that night. I saw your resume, your publications, your academic awards. And then I saw the note you wrote HR about your son. It took me aback. It's not common that someone on the front lines of maintenance has credentials that far eclipse the job at hand, but you made a conscious choice, a lesson in priorities. He shifted slightly self-conscious under her unflinching gaze. It's easy to earn prestige, he said quietly. It's harder to keep the people you love close. Harder, she agreed. And more important. Emma paused, then reached into her purse and pulled out a small leather-bound notebook. She opened it to a blank page and scribbled a few words, Director of Cultural Engagement. She tore the page out and placed it on the desk in front of him. I want you to help me build something new here. Not just fixing leaks or recalibrating sensors, but creating a program that ensures every guest feels seen, heard, and understood. A role that leverages every one of your languages and all of your empathy. Jack stared at the page, heart pounding. Emma, that's far above what I... But she held up a hand. I know it's above what you ever imagined. That's why it's perfect. Our world has enough layers of hierarchy. What we need is someone who's been overlooked yet never stopped showing up. Someone who measures success not by titles, but by the impact they make on individual lives. Someone like you. He swallowed, eyes drifting to the tiny thermostat panel he'd just serviced. Then back to her. For the first time, Jack felt the weight of recognition of genuine trust settle in his chest. I'd be honored, he managed. Emma nodded, a genuine warmth softening her usually steely expression. Good. We'll expand your role, and yes, we'll formalize the title later. But tonight I wanted to thank you personally, and to say that I've learned something valuable from you, that leadership isn't always about giving orders. Sometimes it's about stepping aside to let someone else fix what you didn't even know was broken from the inside. Jack exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing. Thank you, Emma. I won't let you down. She leaned back, satisfied. I know you won't. Now, before you go, I should probably apologize for sending you up here on a false pretext. He tilted his head with a grin. Not at all. The thermostat wasn't the only thing that needed a little recalibration tonight. Emma laughed softly, an unexpected, genuine sound that filled the corner office with a rare intimacy. Well said, she agreed. Get back to your shift, Jack. I'll let the overnight crew know where to find the new program outline. He picked up his toolbox and offered a polite nod. Good night, Emma. Good night, Jack. As he stepped into the corridor, Jack felt lighter than he had in years, a sense that his unseen labors at the edges of the Easton Grand were finally acknowledged, valued in a way that transcended job descriptions. And behind him in the glow of her office, Emma Sterling watched him go, fully aware that the man who'd entered her realm as a mere technician had just become the catalyst for her greatest transformation yet. Jack Harper checked his watch as he stepped through the neon glow of Millie's Diner. It was 7:15 on a Friday morning, the hour when the neighborhood still smelled of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon. In his gloved hand, he cradled 2 steaming mugs of hot chocolate marshmallows, bobbing like tiny white buoys. Under his arm was a crisp white envelope neatly addressed in Emma Sterling's elegant script. He took a steadying breath. This wasn't just breakfast, it was a crossing of worlds. Sliding into the familiar vinyl booth, Jack set down the mugs, the sweet steam fogging the overhead light momentarily. Across from him, Max Harper, his 7-year-old son, pushed his glasses back up the bridge of his nose and regarded the envelope with shy excitement. Is that from the boss lady? He asked, eyeing Jack with a grin that spoke of inside jokes and shared conspiracies. Jack smiled, smoothing his grease-stained coveralls as best he could under the diner's harsh fluorescence. It is indeed. He slid the envelope across the Formica tabletop. Open it if you want. Max ripped it open in one eager motion, tearing neatly along the fold to reveal a pale blue card inside. He read aloud in a squeaky voice, "Please join me for breakfast this Friday at Millie's Diner. Emma Sterling." He looked up at Jack with wide, delighted eyes. "She wants to have breakfast here with us." Jack chuckled softly and ruffled his son's hair. "She knows this is your favorite place. Says she wanted to meet the boy who taught her how to speak alien and cat." Max laughed, a bright, infectious sound that turned heads at nearby tables. "Alien is easy," he declared, "just 4 clicks and 3 squeaks. Cat is all tail flicks." He traced an imaginary tail flick in the air, waggling his finger like a little paw. Jack and half the booth full of diners erupted in gentle laughter. Just then the door chimed. Emma Sterling stepped in a gentle snowfall of early morning light, catching the edges of her tailored navy coat. She paused, scanning the diner until her eyes settled on their booth. For a moment, Jack caught sight of the same quiet curiosity in her gaze that he'd glimpsed in her corner office. She smoothed her coat over the back of the seat and slipped into the booth beside Max, folding the envelope and tucking it into her bag. "Good morning," she said, voice warm against the din of bleach-scented air and clinking plates. "Morning," Jack replied, sliding one of the hot chocolates toward her. She accepted it, hands closing around the mug as if it were a small anchor in uncharted waters. Max beamed. "I made Boss Lady's favorite marshmallows on top. Daddy says it's important to make you feel at home." Emma's lips curved into a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Thank you, Max. This is perfect." With a careful sip, she closed her eyes as though tasting reassurance itself. Jack reached for the syrup bottle and began pouring chocolate over Max's pancakes, the din of diner chatter fading into the background as a quiet bubble of intimacy enveloped their booth. Emma watched the exchange, her posture easing. She swapped pleasantries with Jack about the crisp morning air, but her real attention was on Max, the bright boy, whose laughter had once bridged her austerity and his father's unassuming hope. So Emma ventured after a moment, "I've been practicing my alien sounds, but my cat impressions need work." She leaned toward Max. "Do you think I could get a quick lesson?" Max beamed and hopped out of the booth, adopting a low crouch. He pressed a finger to his lips in mock seriousness. "You must be very quiet," he whispered, then emitted a soft series of gentle trills. Emma copied him, tongue-rolling in awkward but earnest mimicry. The result was somewhere between a squeaky toy and the distant purr of a contented kitten. Jack watched as Emma's eyes lit with unguarded delight. It was a side of her he'd glimpsed only in fragments, the woman beneath the corporate armor capable of laughter that wasn't polished for the press. When Max hopped back into the booth, Emma clapped softly. "Excellent work, teacher." She pressed a finger to her lips, offering a tiny bow of respect. Max's grin widened until his eyes nearly disappeared. Jack felt the weight of his own pride and relief. This breakfast was never just a formality. It was an invitation to something bigger, a genuine friendship, a blending of family and work, of oil-stained hands and silk-stitched collars. Emma cleared her throat and sipped her hot chocolate long enough for Jack to worry she might be about to revert to boardroom mode. Instead, she set the mug down and rested both hands on the table. "Jack, I wanted to thank you," she began in a tone that held no proclamation of authority, "for inviting me into your world, for teaching me what truly matters, kindness, connection, and laughter." Jack swallowed, eyes flicking to Max, who watched them with wide curiosity. "Thank you, Emma," he said softly, "for understanding." She nodded, then turned to Max. "And you, young man, are quite the ambassador, teaching a CEO how to speak cat-impressive work." Max beamed, then leaned forward conspiratorially. "If you really want to impress the cats, you have to also sniff the air like you smell treats coming. Here, like this." He demonstrated with a big theatrical sniff, scrunching up his nose. Emma followed suit, scrunching hers so hard that Jack had to stifle a laugh. Their shared laughter rose like a warm current through the booth. A nearby waitress paused in her tray, returning duties, smiling as she wiped her hands. "Looks like the world's smallest diplomat struck again," she murmured, and then went about her work. Emma's laughter faded into a tender smile. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small notepad and pen supplies Jack recognized from his own toolbox. She scribbled something and handed him the page. "Friday breakfasts are now official. Family table reserved. Emma. Jack tucked the note into his pocket, his heart warm. He looked at Max, who was already hopping to refill his mug with chocolate syrup. Looks like this diner just got a VIP corner, Jack said quietly. Max hopped back into the booth, pouring syrup with careful precision. Do you think they'll let us have pancakes every Friday? He asked. Emma exchanged a conspiratorial grin with Jack. I think they'll have to, she said. After all, business is built on relationships, and so far ours is off to a very sweet start. Jack reached across the table to steady Emma's chocolate before it could overflow. To new beginnings, he said, raising his mug. Emma met his gaze and clinked her mug against his. To friendship, family, and unplanned adventures. Max joined in with a clumsy cheers of his own, sending a marshmallow sailing and another round of laughter through Millie's diner. In that shabby booth, two worlds had truly come together, stitched by marshmallows, turned by wrench and warmth over pancakes and the promise of Fridays yet to come. Jack Harper had just finished replacing a faulty valve in the East Wing sprinkler system when he felt it a hollow look in the eyes of the front desk clerk as she passed his maintenance cart. It wasn't mere exhaustion, this was something like pity or, worse, resignation. He paused mid-step toolbox balanced on his hip and watched her vanish around the corner. Behind her retreating back, he caught sight of an HR administrator whispering to the lead engineer, both glancing furtively at the security camera monitors. Jack's chest tightened with a familiar, unwelcome tension. He shrugged it off and continued on to the boiler room where the morning's heat wave had pushed the ancient boiler valves to groan in protest. He adjusted a pressure gauge, listening to the hiss of steam settle back into a steady rhythm. That was when his pager buzzed a quick vibration in his pocket that had once meant a guest emergency, a broken pipe, or a power flicker. Now it simply displayed the message badge non-essential, reclassification pending. Jack's fingers froze on the wrench. He blinked at the pager's screen, heart hammering. Non-essential. He swallowed. He knew non-essential meant deletion. An invisible label that would strip him of access, notify security to bar him from critical systems, and ultimately sign him up for the cost-cutting AI rollout slated to replace overnight maintenance. He closed his eyes and pressed the pager back into his pocket, finishing his work on autopilot. He left the boiler room, his footsteps echoing against scrubbed concrete. Every corridor looked narrower. Every door seemed locked just a bit tighter. At the end of the hall, the water fountain dripped softly, taunting him with its normalcy. The rumor mill had been churning for weeks. He'd heard snippets in the break room vox pops of conversation about Phase 2, automation, AI-run diagnostics, and streamlining headcount. At first, he'd laughed it off over coffee with Max's schoolmate's father, joking that even Alexa wouldn't know how to rig a makeshift fix on an emergency exit sign. But that laughter died the moment the pager lit up. His palms grew clammy with worry, and he realized two things at once. One, he couldn't afford to lose this job. It was what allowed him to be home when Max needed him most. And two, he had nowhere to go if this label stuck. No academia to return to, no colleagues waiting in some office to pull him back into the lecture halls. Just one boy counting on him to be there for dinner, tuck-ins, weekend science fairs. He shoved the wrench into his toolbox and strode toward Emma Sterling's glass-walled office on the 8th floor. His throat felt tight, his palms slick. He'd never barged in unannounced, but this couldn't wait. He tapped once on her door's frosted glass panel, 2 quick raps. Holding his breath, he watched the silhouette of her upright posture shift as she mentally shelved whatever crisis management call she'd been mid-sentence on. "Come in," she called, voice steady but laced with concern. Jack stepped into the polished sanctuary of her corner office. Emma Sterling was seated behind her oak desk, the morning sun cutting sharp patterns across the pale carpet. She offered him a small, polite smile. "Jack, what can I do for you?" He swallowed, looking down at his work boots, grease-stained and worn, the very symbol of what this job had meant. "Emma, I just got a notification. My badge is being reclassified as non-essential. They're talking about automating, well, pretty much everything I do at night." Her smile faltered, curiosity flashing across her eyes. "Show me," she said, standing. They walked together to the security console in the hallway outside her office. With a few taps, she pulled up his employee status. Sure enough, a red label blinked beneath his ID, non-essential. Below it, a smaller note, eligible for AI replacement phase 2. Emma frowned, tracing the screen with a finger. Non-essential. Huh? She murmured. She turned to him, blue-gray eyes sharp. They're going to replace you with AI. Do they know what you do? Jack shrugged helplessly. He felt exposed, like someone had opened his chest and labeled his beating heart optional. They think it's cost-efficient, he said. I heard the HR head mention it during last night's shift change. Said routine tasks were better left to algorithms. They never actually see the people behind the valves, the wires, the guest interactions. Emma tapped her temple as though nudging her own memory. They haven't seen you, not really. She spun back to her office, beckoning him inside. Her assistant hovered uncertainly in the doorway, a silent witness to whatever storm was brewing. Emma walked behind her desk and leaned forward. Jack, she said, eyes unwavering. I know exactly what you do, and it's more than routine. She glanced down at his coveralls, still bearing faint smudges from yesterday's air handling repairs. Your job is critical not just to the hotel's systems, but to our reputation. You're our frontline ambassador, fixing problems and soothing guests in 7 languages. Jack shook his head, voice tight. I'm just trying to keep the heat off Max. He swallowed again. If I lose this, I lose everything. Emma's jaw worked as she processed his confession. She'd known he was a single dad, putting everything on the line, but hearing it out loud, seeing the fear in his eyes that ignited something in her. She pivoted to her laptop and pulled up the department's cost analysis graphs and projections. She scrolled until she found the meeting minutes from last week's executive strategy session. Automate night maintenance, reduce labor costs by 15%. She scrolled more. Assess elimination of redundancies. AI forecasts. ROI charts, efficiency models. It all stared back in cold, sterile figures. But as she weighed the numbers, Emma found herself replaying every instance Jack had rescued the hotel's image, guiding stranded guests in Arabic after the power flicker, diagnosing the sprinkler sensor failure in record time, diffusing an irate guest complaint in fluent German, de-escalating the panic when a concierge misspelled Edelweiss. Those weren't redundant tasks. They were miracles disguised as maintenance. Emma slammed the laptop shut and steadied her breath. Those spreadsheets, she said, voice shaking slightly. They don't capture loyalty. They don't account for humanity. Jack looked up puzzled, but hopeful. What can we do? Emma squared her shoulders. We fight this right now. She walked back to the console, fingers tapping furiously as she overrode the HR classification. I'm pulling your ID out of the non-essential list. I'm calling a department head meeting this afternoon. I'll make the case that our brand doesn't run on algorithms. It runs on people like you. Jack stared, mouth slightly agape. Emma, you can't. I can, she interrupted softly but firmly, because if I let you go, I'll be the one betraying the people I need most. She turned back to him, eyes fierce. You're not non-essential, Jack. You're indispensable. He closed the distance between them in one swift step and offered her a grateful nod, a single tear glinting in his eye. Thank you, he whispered. Emma brushed her hair back over her shoulder and folded her arms, a stance she reserved for boardroom showdowns. Just get back to work. I'll handle the data. She paused, then added, if they want spreadsheets, I'll show them numbers they can't ignore. Guest satisfaction scores up 30%, recovery time down 60%, employee loyalty at an all-time high. That's what you do. Jack exhaled relief and something fiercer mingling in his chest. He turned to leave, then paused at her door. Emma, he said. She looked up concerned. I don't know how to thank you. Max and I will never forget this. Emma watched him cross the threshold, then exhaled a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. As the office door clicked shut behind Jack Harper, she realized she had a choice: bow to the ease of efficiency or stand for the people who made that efficiency possible. She touched the cool glass of her office window, looking down at the marble lobby where Jack had first emerged as hero. Tomorrow she would make sure the board saw him not as a line item, but as the beating heart of the Easton Grand. Emma Sterling stood at the center of the Easton Grand's opulent ballroom, her tailored blazer, unbuttoned sleeves rolled up in a rare display of earnest intent. Rows of polished mahogany chairs arced around her, filled with department heads, executives, and line staff alike, each one summoned by the unprecedented all-staff assembly she had called just that morning. Crystal chandeliers cast warm pools of light over the sea of expectant faces. As Emma glanced across the room, she saw more than colleagues gathered. She saw a family of dedicated people who had helped build this hotel's reputation. Tonight, she would give them a story worth believing in. Clearing her throat, she permitted herself a moment's stillness, letting the hush deepen until every whisper faded. Then she spoke, her voice carrying easily through the vaulted space. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice." She began scanning the room until her eyes found Jack Harper standing near the back, arms folded over his grease-streaked coveralls. He seemed to shrink beneath the ballroom lights, his gaze low, as if he did not belong on this stage. Emma's heart clenched. "I promised transparency, so I want to share something crucial. I almost lost our most vital team member." Murmurs rippled through the assembled crowd. A few eyebrows lifted in surprise. Emma continued, leaning forward over the podium. "Last week, Human Resources proposed reclassifying Jack as non-essential. They argued that night shift maintenance could be automated, that his tasks were routine, that the hotel could save money by phasing out his position." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. But what those spreadsheets did not capture was Jack's humanity. Jack's head snapped up, his shoulders tensing as he realized where this was heading. Emma looked directly at him, unwavering. "When our central air conditioning failed during the record-breaking heat wave, Jack didn't just repair a broken thermostat. He spoke to irate guests in 7 languages: English, German, Japanese, Arabic, Russian, Spanish, Korean, calming their fury with kindness and sincerity. He wove us back together with nothing but compassion and technical skill." She turned back to the audience, her arms sweeping out. "We talk about hospitality as if it's only a service we offer on plush linens and silver trays. But true hospitality lives in human connection, not algorithms." I watched him kneel beside a frightened child who thought the blackout would swallow him whole, and I realized that Jack doesn't just fix machines, he saves people. A ripple of applause swept through the room. Tentative at first, then firm as Emma's words sank in. She held the applause, gently raising a hand. "That's not the only reason Jack matters." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a simple photograph, Jack and his son Max, eyes bright despite hospital masks, standing beside a lifeless IV stand. "Jack is a single father," Emma said quietly, her voice softening with empathy. "Max has battled a chronic illness since he was 6. Jack chose night shifts so he could be home for medicine doses and bedtime stories. He gave up a promising academic career, PhD in linguistics, adjunct professor at NYU, just so he could watch his son grow." Jack's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed, glancing at the photo, then back at his colleagues. Emma held the image aloft for all to see. "This is the sacrifice that spreadsheets never recognize. It's the courage that spreadsheets can never quantify. It's the quiet heroism we often overlook." Tears shimmered in more than a few eyes. Across the polished floor, the head of finance covered his mouth with his hand visibly shaken. Emma let the silence stretch long enough that every person felt the gravity of her message. Then she leaned forward, voice resolute. "If we let Jack slip through our fingers, we lose something far more precious than cost savings. We lose the heart of our hotel." She straightened and allowed the applause to rise into a crescendo that shook the crystal chandeliers overhead. Staff leapt to their feet in a spontaneous outpouring of gratitude. Clapping hands echoed against the marble walls. Jack stood frozen for a moment, eyes wide as the room honored him. Emma stepped down from the podium and crossed the floor in 2 long strides, taking Jack's hand in hers. The ballroom, once hushed, erupted again this time, with cheers, whistles, and a standing ovation. Jack's face glowed with disbelief. He squeezed Emma's hand and nodded, voice catching when he spoke. "Thank you," he said simply, but the depth of his gratitude spoke volumes. Emma smiled, meeting his gaze in the vast expanse of the ballroom. "We need more than machines," she replied. "We need people who believe in people." In the days that followed, Jack's badge was officially reprioritized as essential personnel, and the planned AI takeover of night maintenance was shelved indefinitely. Instead, Emma appointed him to lead a new guest empathy initiative, a program that would train all staff in cultural sensitivity, crisis, de-escalation, and multilingual communication tasks no algorithm could master. Jack, still wearing his grease-spattered coveralls, stood at the forefront of a movement to redefine hospitality. At the end of the assembly, staff lined up to shake Jack's hand, to thank him, to share stories of their own moments when his quiet heroism had touched their lives. The concierge whispered, "We wouldn't have made it through that blackout without you." The banquet manager admitted, "Your quick thinking saved our international gala." A bellman said, "You always take the time to ask after my family. That matters more than you know." Jack felt a swell of pride, not in himself, but in the community he had helped forge. Emma watched from the side, her heart full, knowing she had made the right choice. No spreadsheet could measure the value of trust restored, of dignity upheld, of a family kept whole. That night, as the ballroom emptied and the chandeliers dimmed, Jack and Emma walked side by side through the lobby. The grand fountains murmured behind them, and the late-night glow of city lights filtered through the glass doors. Jack paused, looking up at Emma. "I never expected any of this," he admitted softly. Emma met his gaze, her eyes warm. "Neither did I," she said. "But now I can't imagine this place without you." He laughed, a low, relieved sound. "And I can't imagine it without you." They shared a moment of quiet celebration amid the marble grandeur, two unlikely allies who had reminded an entire company that the truest measure of worth lies not in numbers, but in the courage to choose humanity over efficiency. And as dawn approached, the Easton Grand stood ready to welcome its guests once more, its heartbeat stronger than ever, powered by compassion, connection, and the unbreakable bond of one quiet hero and the CEO who finally saw him. Jack Harper's shift was supposed to end at 6:00 p.m., but he never made it to the time clock kiosk in the Easton Grand's hushed service corridor. Instead, he paused outside the glowing marble lobby, the evening's golden light slanting through the front doors, and for one long moment he let himself consider walking away. The applause of the all-staff assembly still echoed in his mind, mixing with the uneasy stir of resentment he'd sensed from a few of the higher-up managers. They'd clapped politely, but his heart knew the truth. Some believed he was nothing more than a charity case, a sentimental nod to goodwill, a liability in the name of compassion. And maybe they were right. He pulled his badge from his coverall pocket and tapped it against the reader. Nothing but a red access. Denied flashed back. Frowning, he tapped again. Still denied. His locker, too, was inexplicably empty. No toolbox, no oil-streaked gloves, not even the faded photo of his son tacked inside. The corridor felt cavernous and hollow without the familiar clink of his equipment. The smell of industrial cleaner and late-shift coffee drifted by, but it couldn't hide the quiet ache in his chest. The security guard, Mr. Howard, mistook the access failure for a system glitch. "Clocking in tomorrow morning, Harper?" he asked, voice low. Jack simply nodded. He didn't have the energy to explain that this system rejection felt more like a dismissal. With one last look down the corridor that had defined his nights for the past 2 years, he stepped out the service exit and melted into the sidewalk's early dusk shadows. Back in her corner office, Emma Sterling watched her inbox flash with alerts. Badge inactive, Jack Harper. Locker. Emptied. Jack Harper. Security incident. Lost badge. Panic clawed at her chest. She'd marshaled boardrooms, calmed investors, and negotiated hostile takeovers, but this felt personal, like losing sight of a vital piece of her own heart. She grabbed her coat unbuttoned in haste and fled the silver-lined tranquility of the executive floor for the crumbling brick of Crescent Bay Elementary, where her calendar showed Jack's son Max should have been released at 3:00 p.m. Clouds had gathered overhead, and a soft drizzle slicked the school's playground, turning the rubberized surf to a faint sheen of moisture. Emma's sharp heels squeaked on the curb as she scanned the open gate. Children clustered in rainbow-colored raincoats. Parents juggled backpacks and umbrellas. None of them were Jack. The lump in her throat tightened until her breath came in shallow bursts. She couldn't believe she'd let things escalate this far. Then she saw him, Jack, crouched beside a metal slide, sorting through the contents of a soggy backpack. Max stood nearby, arms crossed, his small frame shivering in a thin hoodie. Emma approached slowly, as if the veneer of authority might snap if she walked too hastily. Jack glanced up, surprise flickering in his dark eyes, quickly replaced by a guarded calm. Mr. Harper, she began, voice unsteady. Jack nodded, eyes flicking to Max. He's fine, ma'am. Just needed dry socks. Emma swallowed past the lump in her throat. I'm so sorry. I tried your office, the service corridor, your badge was denied, your locker emptied. I thought something happened to you. Jack's jaw tightened. I denied myself, he replied quietly, avoiding her gaze. The breeze whispered through the empty swings, and Max tugged at Jack's sleeve. Dad, is everything okay? Jack knelt to Max's level, brushing a raindrop from his son's hair. Everything's fine, buddy. He forced a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. Turning back to Emma, he said, But I'm not fine. I can't be the symbol of charity. I might have saved the day once, but I won't stick around for the politics. Emma felt tears prick her eyes. Jack, please. He held up a hand. You saved Max, he said, voice raw, when I couldn't afford the trial. You did that. The rest, I'm not so sure. Emma closed her eyes and counted to 3, steadying herself. Then she reached out, gingerly resting a hand on his shoulder. Jack, look at me. He did reluctance, folding into the depths of his gaze. I made a mistake. I thought rescue was charity. I was wrong. I thought I could protect you from the fallout, but I ended up pushing you away. I'm sorry. For a heartbeat, Jack said nothing. The playground's laughter and shouts faded to a distant hum. Max stepped forward, his small hand sliding into Jack's. Emma dropped to one knee in front of them, unperturbed by her wetsuit. Max, she said softly, meeting the boy's curious eyes. You're the bravest kid I know. Will you let me do something brave too? Will you tell your dad that I want him back at work where he belongs? Max's eyes widened, then crinkled in a shy smile. He looked at Jack. Dad, Miss Sterling says you make things matter. Jack's chest tightened. He looked at Emma, searching her face for hints of guile, found only earnest regret and hope. He took a trembling breath. You're serious, he asked. Emma nodded. I've reclassified your position myself, facilities supervisor. I'll update the board and HR. No flags, no ambiguity. You and Max have earned every right to be here. Jack's gaze flicked down to Max, whose grin illuminated the dim evening. Then he looked back at Emma, vulnerability flickering in the depth of his eyes. I'd like to stay, he said, voice small but determined. For Max and for everyone here who needs a real person, not a program. Emma felt relief wash through her. She rose and offered her hand, but Jack instead pulled her into a hug so fierce that her shoulders bumped his coveralls. She returned the embrace, surprising them both with its warmth. Max clambered into Jack's other arm, stacking his embrace on top of theirs, and Emma patted Jack's back gently. When they finally pulled away, the 3 of them stood in a quiet triangle under the flickering playground light. The drizzle had eased to a gentle mist. Emma brushed her hair from her face. Welcome back, she said, her smile reflecting in Jack's weary but grateful eyes. Jack ruffled Max's hair, looking at Emma with something closer to awe than gratitude. Thank you for fighting for us, he said simply. Emma shook her head. Thank you for staying. The evening shadows lengthened as Emma, Jack, and Max walked back toward the hotel gate side by side, an unlikely trio drawn together by courage, compassion, and the unbreakable bonds of family. And in their quiet determination, the Easton Grand found its true foundation, not marble or air conditioning, but the simple promise that no one would ever be left to fade away unseen again. Jack Harper's first morning as facilities supervisor began not behind a desk, but in the echoing expanse of the main lobby. The dawn light glimmered off the marble floors, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't here to fix a broken pipe or clear a jammed air duct. Instead, he carried a stack of laminated cards and a clamshell box of multicolored markers, his tool belt replaced by something a little lighter, the quiet conviction that people mattered most. He gathered the front desk team in the circular seating alcove near the concierge desk. They shuffled in, some in crisp uniforms bristling with officiousness, others with guarded curiosity, after all. Jack had once been the handyman in coveralls, not the man giving directives, but he greeted each by name, extending a warm good morning in English, then following it with a soft Guten Morgen, Ohayo gozaimasu, Sabah al-Khair. Dobra utro and buenos dias. The routine brought ripples of surprised smiles. It wasn't about showing off, it was about reminding them that a simple greeting could turn a stranger into a guest. Thanks for coming. Jack began choosing his words for everyone's benefit. I know you've got your routines, check-in scripts, room blocks, billing codes. Today, I want us to slow down. I want us to listen first, then speak. Not because it's on a checklist, but because it's how we actually help people feel at home. A receptionist raised her hand. Jack, do we really need 7 languages? I barely passed high school Spanish. Jack leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I don't expect everyone to speak 7 languages fluently. What I do hope is that you learn one phrase in a guest's mother tongue, how can I help you, and deliver it with sincerity. Then ask follow-up questions in English. The point is to show you care enough to try. He passed out the cards. Each had a phonetic spelling for how can I help you in German, Japanese, Arabic, Russian, Spanish, Korean, and French. Beneath the phrase, he'd scrawled a single reminder. Look into their eyes. Pause. Breathe. As the group practiced German Wie kann ich Ihnen helfen. Jack walked among them gently, correcting pronunciations, offering a nod to one trainee who'd nailed the rolling R and A thumbs up to another whose pitch rose at just the right moment. Laughter broke out when someone mangled the Japanese phrase into something closer to pizza on the house, but Jack's easy grin turned it back into a teaching moment rather than a humiliation. By mid-morning, Jackie had moved the session upstairs to the training room, where a dozen bellmen, porters, and junior engineers joined the front desk team. He stood at a whiteboard having sketched out a simple circle with 3 segments greeting listening action. Guests don't just come here for air conditioning or room service. They come here for the feeling of being seen, being heard, being safe. Our job is to fill those segments, start by greeting them in their language, listen without interrupting, then take action. It could be as small as offering a chilled water bottle or as big as escorting them to a quieter lounge area. He told a story earlier that week. A frail, elderly woman from Brazil had crumpled a check-in form in frustration. He approached her, spoke "Como posso ajudar, señora," and simply sat beside her as she wept, offering a cool towel and a gentle silence. Afterwards, she hugged him, whispering gratitude. That's not in any manual, Jack said, his voice steady. But it's what people remember. Throughout the day, trainees paired off and role-played one as a guest, arriving post-midnight exhausted and disoriented, another as a newly hired receptionist who had to navigate both empathy and efficiency. Jack wandered the crowded room, listening intently, stopping to ask a retiring security officer how he might help a lost tourist or nudging a shy engineer to break eye contact and smile. By afternoon's end, the whiteboard was scrawled with feedback. Ask more open-ended questions. Use reflective listening. Offer solutions before guests ask. But Jack didn't leave them with theory alone. He led a walkthrough of the lower-level corridors, pointing out broken light fixtures and jammed sprinkler covers, areas he'd personally fixed last night. He showed how to check the backup generators in the boiler room, how to access the service stairwell without disturbing housekeeping, and how to calibrate a simple wall-mounted thermostat. Each demonstration wove in a customer-centric tagline, "Keep the lounge comfortable, so we keep the memories warm," or "A functioning corridor light is a beacon of safety at 3 a.m." His tone was neither condescending nor theatrical, just matter-of-fact grounded in the reality that technical skill and human grace were 2 sides of the same coin. Back in the lobby as the sun dipped, Jack noticed Emma Sterling watching from the mezzanine balcony. She gave him a slow nod, the smallest crack in her usual reserve. He returned it with a brief salute. Then he descended the stairs and joined his son Max, who was doing homework in a quiet corner. Jack ruffled his boy's hair and introduced him to a bellman who'd been one of the day's trainees. Max Jack said, "This is Hector. Today, Hector helped me teach everyone how to say, 'Welcome home.'" Hector's face lit up, proud to have learned not just a phrase, but an attitude. At the end of the shift, Jack gathered his team one last time under the grand staircase. Tomorrow, he said, we're rolling this out with every staff member, housekeeping, kitchen crew, even the valet. Because hospitality isn't just front desk deep. You'll get a schedule by email, and I'll be around if you need help practicing. But tonight, take your cards home. Practice with anyone you meet, taxi drivers, baristas, your neighbors. Keep the habit alive. We're not just fixing leaks here. We're building bridges. As the employees murmured their farewells, Jack stepped outside into the cool evening air. The Easton Grand's facade glowed in the streetlights. Max tugged his hand. "Dad, can we come back tomorrow?" Jack smiled, heart full. "We sure can, buddy." Behind them, staff members filed out lifetimes of training manuals replaced by something more elemental. The simple power of showing up, speaking someone's language, and listening like it mattered. And in the days to come, Jack's quiet leadership would ripple through the hotel's corridors, slowing down, frenetic mornings, grounding panicked moments, alchemizing routine service into genuine care. Because real hospitality didn't come from a spreadsheet or an app. It came from a man who had learned to balance bolts and heartbeat with equal skill, and in doing so had reshaped the Easton Grand from the ground up. The clatter of pipes and the hiss of steam had become a strangely comforting soundtrack to Jack Harper's days at the Easton Grand. In the maze of maintenance corridors and hidden utility closets, he no longer felt like an intruder, but part of the very heartbeat of the hotel. And standing beside him, clipboard in hand, often wearing a slightly rumpled blazer instead of her usual power suit, was Emma Sterling, his unlikely partner in warming what had once been a cold corporate fortress. It began innocently enough on a routine inspection of the boiler room. Jack had discovered a slow leak in one of the main pressure valves, a drip so gentle it would have escaped most eyes. But he and Emma had wandered back there together, she drawn by the soft scuff of his work boots echoing against concrete walls, and she'd asked, genuinely curious, "Can I see how you catch that? I never would have noticed." So he crouched beside the valve hand, steady, even in the low light, explaining the telltale signs of corrosion, the faint mineral ring, the microscopic crack along the seam. She leaned in, absorbing every word, occasionally reaching out to turn a wrench under his guidance. For Jack, the surprise wasn't that she wanted to learn. It was how natural it felt, her fingers patiently handling tools she'd once observed only from porcelain conference tables. From that moment, their days grew threaded with these small collaborations. Wednesday mornings found them poring over maintenance logs and Emma's corner office room service coffee steaming between them, as Jack highlighted patterns only a technician's eye could see, recurring flickers in the east wing lights and odd hum in the backup generator that warranted preventative lubrication. Emma, ever analytical, would tap her pen thoughtfully, asking questions that refined Jack's hunches into actionable checklists. Their voices formed a soft cadence, Jack's firm and reassuring, Emma's calm and curious, until the entire room seemed to lean in, waiting for their next insight. By Thursday afternoons, the two of them could be spotted sharing a booth at the little diner around the corner. The one-terrace diners called Mom's Place, because the waitress still remembered everyone's order after a single visit. Emma, who usually ate at five-star tables under glittering chandeliers, now sat with Max at her side, both of them delicately navigating chocolate milkshakes and miniature pancakes. Jack watched as Emma knelt on the booth's vinyl seat, her tailored skirt tucked just so, coaxing shy smiles from his son with impromptu shadow puppets. Max, normally guarded with newcomers, giggled as Emma spoke good morning to him in broken Korean, one of the 7 phrases Jack had taught her. In those moments, titles faded. Emma wasn't CEO, just Miss Emma to Max, and Jack's heart swelled as he saw his worlds converge around that tiny table. Their partnership deepened in the evenings when the guest floors had emptied out and the hotel hushed into something more intimate. Jack would tap on Emma's office door, his coveralls smeared with grease, while she set aside her final spreadsheet for the day. They'd settle into ergonomic chairs, a pot of strong coffee between them, and tuck into room service sandwiches as they strategized over upcoming projects, a new lighting initiative, plans for a staff-driven wellness room in the basement, or deciphering the guest feedback form that kept mentioning heart and warmth alongside cleanliness. Their brainstorming sessions stretched late into the night, peppered with laughter, when Emma teased Jack about his impossible ability to name every HVAC filter size on the first try, or when he caught her off guard by quoting an obscure engineering spec she'd mentioned once in an offhand remark. Each morning, their work carried new momentum. Staff members, bellmen, housekeepers, even the sous chef greeted Jack and Emma with fresh enthusiasm, as if discovering that leadership could be approachable without losing its dignity. Jack's technical directives felt less like orders and more like invitations, and Emma found herself deferring to his judgment on everything from the angle of drip pans to the best way to train a new intake technician. Their respect was mutual. Emma trusted Jack's instinct in a wiring closet, and he relied on her network to clear roadblocks that no wrench could loosen. The turning point came on a late Friday afternoon. A minor water leak had flooded a hallway near the executive's wing. The marble floor was slick and dangerous. By the time Jack arrived, Emma was already there, sleeves rolled up, gripping a wet vac hose like a pro. They moved together in practiced rhythm, Emma guiding staff away from the spill. Jack shutting off the localized valve, then guiding an electrician to replace a corroded joint. Throughout the commotion, Emma's voice was steady. Jack's hands were deft, and the rest of the team watched in awe as the CEO and the former handyman became seamless partners in crisis management. That evening, Emma persuaded Jack to accompany her and Max to her favorite Friday treat, hot chocolate at the rooftop cafe overlooking the city skyline. They perched on tall stools, the wind tousling Max's hair and dancing sparks of city light across Emma's face. The three talked about dreams. Emma confessed she'd always wanted to learn how to build something with her hands. Jack admitted he'd never thought he'd feel so at home in a boardroom, and Max shared plans to invent a hug machine that could deliver unlimited comfort. As laughter fluttered between them, Jack realized this wasn't just a business alliance or an ad hoc friendship. It was something deeper, a kind of family forged in the grime of tunnels and the glow of conference rooms alike. Under the neon sign of the cafe, Emma reached for Jack's hand. No declarations of love, just a quiet squeeze that spoke volumes. Jack looked down at her, the sky a canopy of promise behind her, and felt a shift in his chest, a soft, insistent pulse that said this was more than partnership. It was care woven through every bolt turned, every data point analyzed, every pancake shared under fluorescence. When they returned to the Easton Grand, the lobby was empty except for the echo of their footsteps. Together they paused beneath the grand chandelier, its crystals refracting the final rays of daylight into scattered rainbow flecks on the marble. Emma's gaze met Jack's, and in that silent instant they both acknowledged what had grown between them. Not a fleeting office romance, but a bond rooted in mutual respect, shared purpose, and genuine tenderness. Hand in hand, they climbed the service stairs back to Jack's office, where work awaited a dozen maintenance tickets to review a training plan to finalize and a weekend guest symposium to prepare. Yet as they stepped inside, the weight of those tasks felt lighter, infused with the certainty that they would tackle every challenge side by side. And somewhere down the hall, they could hear the faint echo of Max's giggle, the living emblem of their newfound family. In the corridors of pipes and panels between strategy sessions and diner booths, Jack and Emma had discovered a simple truth. Love doesn't need a gilded ballroom or a scripted declaration. Sometimes it blossoms in the narrow passages where two people meet, tool belts and dreams interlacing until the shining marble palace itself is warmed from within. And in that warmth, they built something stronger than any steel beam, a connection that would weather every storm, powered by the quiet courage of two hearts choosing each other again and again. The old maintenance bay at the Easton Grand had once been a place of low hums and dim fluorescent lights, where tools clinked against metal and the soft shuffle of boots carried the day's last rhythms. Now 1 year later it gleamed with fresh paint, warm wood accents and sunlight pouring through newly installed skylights. Where oil drums and spare parts once sat there were display stations showcasing guest empathy exercises, mock front desk setups, translation booths, and problem simulation corners where participants learned to listen first, solve second. Jack Harper stood at the edge of the main workshop floor, dressed in a crisp button-down bearing the new Empathy Center logo. In his hand, he held a rolled blueprint of the center's next expansion. At his side was Emma Sterling, no longer simply the formidable CEO who'd summoned him to her office, but now a partner in this initiative, her sleeves casually rolled up as they had been so many times before. Max, now 10 and taller by inches, sat cross-legged on a low wooden bench, fiddling with a simple wooden puzzle that he'd crafted himself during the center's opening day kids' workshop. A small crowd of Easton Grand staff, community volunteers, and a few curious neighborhood leaders had gathered for the dedication ceremony. The energy in the room crackled not from spotlights or amplifiers, but from the palpable sense of possibility in the air. These were people who'd once passed through the hotel's grand lobby, oblivious to the gears turning behind the scenes. Now they stood here eager to learn how to bring that same spirit of care into their own lives. Emma tapped the microphone with a gentle smile. "Thank you all for joining us today." She began, her voice warm and unhurried. A year ago, this space was off limits to guests, hidden, utilitarian, functional. We chose this bay as the heart of our new empathy center because it reminds us that true hospitality starts behind the scenes, with the people who never appear on any guest's itinerary. She paused, sweeping her gaze over the workshop stations. Today we open these doors to the community, to teach, to learn, and to grow together. Jack stepped forward, the blueprint now unrolled and held carefully in both hands. When Emma and I stood here last year, we had an idea: what if the same training that made our hotel stand out could make our neighborhood stronger? What if we could equip anyone from seasoned staff to eager volunteers with the skills to truly see one another? He gestured at a station where a group of trainees practiced responding to simulated guest complaints in Spanish and Mandarin. This center is built on the principle we first tested in our own hallways. Start where it's broken, stay until it's better. Max hopped off the bench, excitement lighting his face. He had been enlisted as the official junior ambassador for the center, and today he was about to share his own workshop project, a cribbage board turned puzzle teaching kids how to ask for help politely in 3 languages. "Hi, everyone." He called, voice small but steady. He held up his creation. "I made this so kids my age can learn how asking for help can be fun. My dad taught me that listening is the first step." A ripple of appreciative smiles and nods spread through the audience. Emma and Jack exchanged a proud glance before turning back to the gathered crowd. "We wanted Max to know that his dad's work wasn't just about wrenches and wires," Emma said. "It was about connection. And we wanted him and all of you to know that kindness can be practiced, taught, and shared." Her gaze rested on the plaque mounted behind them. "Start where it's broken. Stay until it's better." Harper Sterling Empathy Center, 2025. An applause broke out, genuine and heartfelt, echoing softly off the painted brick walls. Volunteers who'd helped build the training modules stepped forward, exchanging high fives with hotel staff who'd never before been called teachers. A few audience members dabbed at tears. Others quietly murmured thanks to Emma and Jack for opening up this space. After the formal dedication, the first open session began an interactive listening tour led by Jack himself. Staff members played the roles of various guests, one pretending to be an elderly gentleman with hearing difficulty, another an anxious newcomer whose luggage was lost en route. A line of trainees knelt before each guest, practicing empathetic phrases in their native languages as Jack guided corrections. Notice her hands trembling. Respond with calm reassurance before announcing the solution. Across the bay, Emma stationed herself at a cultural cue corner where volunteers learned to interpret subtle body language signals. She greeted each participant with a gentle nod, then asked them to read the cues on flashcards showing different emotional states: frustration, relief, confusion, gratitude. When a trainee hesitated, Emma quietly shared the story of the Korean child in the hotel lobby that summer, emphasizing the power of small gestures, a lifted eyebrow, a patient smile to bridge cultural gaps. As midday sun filtered through the skylights, the workshop hall buzzed with soft chatter punctuated by laughter and bright moments of understanding. The center's layout encouraged flow and curiosity, a glass-walled office for private coaching, a kitchenette where hospitality recipes were shared for making guests feel at home with warm beverages and simple snacks, and a small auditorium set up for guest speakers. Jack's former academic colleagues, who now volunteered their time to teach language nuances and community leaders training in compassion-driven leadership. Toward the end of the afternoon, Emma and Jack gathered their little family for a final token of thanks. A local artisan had crafted 3 small wooden pins each, engraved with one word: See, Serve, Stay. Jack presented one to Emma C. in recognition of how she had learned to truly observe hearts instead of spreadsheets. Emma returned the gesture with the serve pin, acknowledging Jack's embodiment of selfless service. Then Jack turned to Max, placing the stay pin gently on his backpack strap. "Stay until it's better," he whispered, and Max's grin was brilliant enough to outshine the skylights. The closing ceremony unfolded in a quiet circle under the maple tree, planted at the bay's entrance, a sapling now tall enough to cast dappled shade. In front of Emma and Jack's plaque, participants each took turns reading a favorite line from the center's core manifesto. Hospitality is a dialogue, not a monologue. Kindness is something you grow by watering others. We all carry tools, sometimes wrenches, sometimes words. When the last speaker finished, Emma looked around at the faces lit by afternoon glow staff and neighbors side by side, united by this new institution of care. This, she said softly, voice filled with gratitude is what can happen when you start where it's broken and stay until it's better. Thank you for helping us build this together. As the crowd drifted into small groups exploring the displays and sharing anecdotes of empathy and action, Jack slipped his arm around Emma's shoulders. Max bounded off to demonstrate his cribbage puzzle to a cluster of curious children, and over all of them the plaque glistened in the sunlight. Start where it's broken. Stay until it's better. Harper Sterling Empathy Center, 2025. They had started with an overheated lobby and a dozen disgruntled guests. They had stayed through personal sacrifices, boardroom battles, and self-doubt. And now they had built something far more enduring than any hotel program, a shared home of compassion, a testament to the quiet courage of one single dad who spoke 7 languages of kindness and the CEO who learned to listen. In that transformed bay, the Easton Grand's future shone as brightly as the skylights above, grounded in the simple transformative power of being truly seen.